I thought long and hard about sharing what I'm about to share. Don't worry, I'm not going to cry on YouTube, but it's silly to pretend to be invulnerable. A few weeks ago, I felt so lonely that I sat sobbing in my armchair, hopeless and ugly as an embryo chicken. Loneliness is a weird thing in that the ostensible cause, literally being on your own, has no necessary connection with feeling lonely. After all, it was obvious to Aristotle. It's obvious to everyone that man is a social animal, and yet some people love their own space so much that they wouldn't even own a dog. But this requires a strength of mind that, if you'll pardon the pun, is hard to achieve in isolation. Our characters are formed in the kiln of social interaction. So what happens when society itself impedes the formation of the kind of people who can tolerate being alone? Unfortunately for us today, the answer is all around. Western society mitigates against community, in particular fraternity. Women are more pro-social than men. It's not that women don't get lonely, just that they're better equipped to deal with it. The male loneliness crisis has been exacerbated by the feminization of Western society. If we do live in a patriarchy, it's in the sense that science and engineering are what Camille Paglia calls the attempt by phallic, Apollonian man to subdue the dark Chthonian forces of Mother Nature. Otherwise, Western schools, universities, and many of the professions have become overwhelmingly feminine. HR, with its drawn-out therapeutic litigation, can be seen as an inversion of the male preference for a brief word manifested in the playground tussles of schoolboys. None of this is necessarily a bad thing, but the conflation of masculinity and toxic masculinity is a bad thing. Without men, the basic infrastructure of civilization, from roads to deep-sea internet cables, would soon collapse. Men are more likely to kill themselves. Men are fodder for generals. Men, good men, are the only thing standing between the weak and the bad men who would prey on them. To tell young boys that they're in some vague sense evil because of their sex is, well, evil. But these are societal problems and probably won't go away for at least another generation. In the meantime, what are lonely men to do? The first thing is to understand why you're lonely. I felt lonely after breaking up with my partner of 7 years, so breakups are one cause. Maybe all your friends moved away to the city while you stayed put in the town or village. Maybe your dog just died. Maybe you drink too much or eat too much and you're ashamed to tell anyone, even the people who love you. Understanding the cause is the first step in finding a solution. But there's no quick fix. Plugging the gaps in your life with people or objects won't undo the loss of dignity that always comes with loneliness. So seek to restore dignity. If you can become the kind of person who doesn't look lonely, sullen, stooped, quiet, then you'll find that more people are willing to approach you and make connections with you. After my breakup, I spent months indoors, only going outside to work or walk the dog. I was acting like I was 70 years old and that my life was already over. I was always bailing on commitments, which of course meant that fewer and fewer people bothered arranging anything with me, which made me feel more lonely. I used to work part-time in a deli. Every day, a little old man, very well dressed, would come in and buy the same items: 2 stuffed peppers, 2 slices of ham, and 2 pies. After a few weeks, I asked him how his wife was finding the food. He told me that his wife had died several years ago and said nothing more on the matter. And then it hit me that he was buying in twos as a way of holding on to how life used to be. In other words, some people have a right to feel lonely, others not so much. That doesn't make it any less painful, it just means that where there's a will, there's usually a way. And if when this video ends you still feel lonely, know that you're not alone. It's also okay to cry. With the exception of Jordan Peterson, very few contemporary male role models are lachrymose. And that's fair enough. Weeping TikTokers are to be pitied, not emulated. Stoicism, though, isn't the same as psychopathy. The only thing worse than emotional incontinence is emotional constipation. Crying all the time doesn't negate the catharsis of crying some of the time, just as brute aggression doesn't negate righteous indignation. The trick is knowing when to cry and in what company it's appropriate. When my father lost his second baby, my brother, he cried violently in front of young me. and thus, though it wasn't his intention, I learned a vital lesson about love and loss. Loneliness is crushing, but in the long run it can actually be beneficial. There'll always be a period when the lonely man or woman wallows in that state, but after the wallowing, you'll never again take love or friendship for granted.